After a war of tweeted words between President Donald Trump and the Prime Minister of UK Theresa May, what is left of the so-called special relationship between the UK and America? And with the arrival of a new Indian ambassador to Beijing, how will bilateral relationship between India and China be affected? Welcome to The Point. I'm Li Xin. An extraordinary diplomatic spat has taken place on Twitter between US President Donald Trump and British Prime Minister Theresa May, two transatlantic allies that used to have a special relationship. This flurry of media coverage started on Wednesday when President Trump retweeted 3 unverified anti-Muslim videos from a prominent member of a far-right British group called Britain First. UK Prime Minister Theresa May responded by saying his retweeting was the wrong thing to do. President Trump then rebuked her, telling her to focus on destructive radical Islamic terrorism that is taking place within the United Kingdom. However, 14 minutes before this rebuke went to the correct Theresa May, it was misdirected to a Theresa May scrivener who had just 6 Twitter followers before the president's mistaken handle. What more might President Trump bring to the world's attention, and how will this Twitter spat affect the future relationship of the transatlantic allies? Joining me for the discussion is Rick Dunham, former White House correspondent for Business Week, and Victor Gao, a current affairs commentator. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, while pressed by reporters outside the White House, Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders responded to the president's retweeting as, "Whether it's a real video, that's not the problem. The threat is real." Rick, can we take things like that?
That's ridiculous. That's like someone who worked for Adolf Hitler saying, well, the movies we're showing about Jews aren't true, but the threat is real. I mean, going back to the fascist days. No, I mean, she has no credibility saying anything like that. You have to take, I mean, you have to deal directly with the content that he retweeted, which one of them is known to be false. And the others are of unknown origin. And then secondly, what they said. I mean, it was a far-right hate group, a group that embraces the word hate. And they're anti-Muslim. And this is also a rival to the British Prime Minister. She's worried about her right flank, about the ultra-nationalists, sort of the neo-Nazis in Britain. And so this is just terrible politically for her, because she's trying to be very polite in rebuking Trump while everybody else in Britain can say what they really think of him.
Victor, why do you think President Trump wants to do this at this particular moment, all of a sudden retweeting these videos? I mean, he has been sending out tweets in words all the time, but to retweet somebody's videos and 3 in a row, that's quite unprecedented.
Well, first of all, I think President Donald Trump is well advised to become more responsible as a president of the United States. Exercising his leadership and presidency through tweets is the wrong thing to do, because it's very much spontaneous, it's without deep thinking, it's without being checked and verified by your advisors, by your government departments, for example. And whatever President Donald Trump says through the tweets actually is shattering news, breaking news throughout the world. So he is not only just satisfying his own idiosyncrasy in sending out these tweets, he's also changing world history by sending all these tweets to the world. Secondly, I would say by retweeting these 3 video clippings is the wrong thing to do, mainly because I truly believe Islam is a very dignified religion, and it deserves its place in the world today. And there are people who practice terrorism, sometimes even under the guise of Islam. And any person with decency of the mind need to be able to differentiate what Islam stands for, which is for peace and stability, and what these people with evil minds stand for, and do not get these 2 confused up. And I think by retweeting, President Donald Trump is confusing the black and white, is confusing the wrong and the right, and is sending out the wrong message. And I think he deserves to be rebuked by Prime Minister Theresa May of Britain.
Does his tweets reflect the kind of trend that in the United States fundamentalism is surfacing or resurfacing, whether it is in whatever disguise, but you know, it's a kind of extremist ideas coming to the fore?
I would say there's not a trend toward extremism, but he has empowered and emboldened extremists and racists in the United States. I mean, he didn't get as many votes as Hillary Clinton, but he was duly elected president. What we've seen is people who are white supremacists, who were the hate group leaders, who had sort of been in their caves. They had been out of public limelight. And now all of a sudden, they are using social media just like Donald Trump, and they are getting more publicity. Now, it is a scary moment for American democracy, because you have all of this injected into a world of free speech, and people don't want to censor the speech. But you have to counteract it. And I think what we've seen in Britain and in Germany with his attacks on the German Chancellor has been what we need to see more of in the United States.
Well, one thing that some analysts have been saying is that basically what Theresa May and Donald Trump have been doing is to question each other's moral legitimacy, or the moral legitimacy of their government, of their political system. Is there a growing divide, growing polarization within the Western ideology, let's say?
I think so. I think President Donald Trump has managed to really significantly erode, if not damage, the global leadership of the United States in his short tenure of office so far. And I think he's become more and more discredited, not only by people in developing countries, for example, but more alarmingly by leaders and government agencies in the Western developed countries. And this is a very unusual and very unprecedented development in the world today. And I think if Western leaders find it more and more difficult to really engage with President Donald Trump on a political level, for example, even on an ideological level, then the United States will become more and more distanced away on the global stage by Western countries, especially by countries like Germany, by other Western countries, and now possibly also by Britain. And this is alarming, and this is dangerous. This will mean that the world we are going into will become more and more uncertain, and there will be no well-defined U.S. leadership of the Western world, at least. And in the rest of the world, I think U.S. will become more and more questioned, and this will create a vacuum, and other leaders in other parts of the world probably will look up for China to exercise more of global leadership.
What is the more immediate danger, though, of this kind of false, unverified hate video, hate speech infesting the online world? Are there likely to be more attacks along racial lines?
I think the first thing that we should look for is if there's any anti-American activity in the Muslim world. Some people in the State Department, in Trump's State Department, expressed shock at what he did, and there actually was extra security in the past day at U.S. installations. Fortunately, there was no reaction, but I think we have to look on both ends of what extremists will do to take advantage of this. I mean, he is the dream of Al-Qaeda. He is the dream of ISIS, having somebody who is so inflammatory as president, really unlike the last two presidents, who were very careful, even with the war on terrorism, not to be anti-Muslim.
Basically gave them the legitimacy, what they wanted, what they needed.
Exactly. And now, and the more Donald Trump says things that are verifiably untrue when it comes to Muslims, I think the more damaging it will be in the mainstream Muslim world, because he comes off as a racist. He comes off as someone who's anti-Muslim. This week, one of his tweets that didn't get as much attention, he talked about the Muslim, he calls it his Muslim ban. He wants to ban Muslims from the
Finally,
United States.
he admitted in his own way.
He has said, his Attorney General, his Homeland Security Department say, no, it's not a ban. And then he uses ban in capital letters in his tweets.
This is, I mean, it's a little bit speechless. I mean, how do you think, Victor, that this kind of tweets, this kind of narrative can be used exactly by fundamentalists to wreak more havoc to people's mind and body.
I think President Donald Trump probably has forgotten that as the U.S. president, he's not a single ordinary citizen. He's not only a person, he is actually the leader of the United States of America. He's claimed the leader of the Western world, for example, and he is probably one of the most important persons on the global stage. So whatever he says and does, whatever he doesn't say and doesn't do, have significance, and people tend to equate what he says as the official position of the United States. Whatever he says which smears on Islam may be interpreted or misinterpreted as representing the official U.S. government position, and this will be very much alienating to the hundreds of thousands of millions of the Muslims in the world, because I think Islam needs to be treated with all respect and the dignity, and we need to deal with those terrorists, those extremists as they are, and we cannot confuse them with Islam itself. And I think by confusing these two, President Donald Trump is sending the wrong message. And I think the Muslim brothers and sisters in the world may have a legitimate reason not to be happy about what Donald Trump is doing, and probably they may even want to do things against what he is standing for.
Again, I think let's not take this out of the context. He was doing this among all the tweets that has been sending out, attacking the so-called pro-establishment media, for instance, CNN refusing to take part in the Christmas party, and he said that is great. How do you look at that? I mean,
well, I mean, I do think we have to look at this is a specific case because it has such international ramifications, but you're absolutely right. The context, this was in the middle of a tweet storm. I mean, the president has been waking up every morning this week and just going on rants about a wide range of things. He accused the former Republican congressman of possibly being involved in a murder conspiracy. I mean, there have been, it's a wide range. He's been talking about his media enemies. He's been talking about the Democrats on Capitol Hill. He was making fun of them. Some Republicans he's attacking. It's just, this is not discipline. Victor is right that once you assume a leadership position, you have to realize that all of your actions have significance beyond just the immediate action. And I think he's just been unplugged. And he said recently, I'm president, I can do whatever I want. And I think we're seeing he's doing whatever he wants.
Wow.
Whenever he wants to.
Wow. Well, we will keep a close watch on the situation. What can we say? I mean, who's going to stop that? How are things going to possibly change? Do we have any idea?
I would say we have to hope for his chief of staff, but his chief of staff has been letting him do this. I mean, the other thing is he often does it before his chief of staff controls him, meaning when he's at his estate in Florida or before his chief of staff comes into work in the morning.
Well, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Victor Gao and Rick Dunham, for joining us on this discussion. And you have been watching The Point with me, Li Xin. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be back right after this. Gautam Bambawale, India's new ambassador to China, arrived in Beijing a couple of days ago on November the 19th to take up his position. Now, Mr. Bambawale had until recently served as High Commissioner to Pakistan and earlier an envoy to Bhutan. As a Mandarin speaker, he had also served as the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Indian Embassy in Beijing. So his arrival in Beijing comes at a time when India and China are trying to work on a forward-looking approach in their ties. How do Indian scholars comment on the appointment and the sign Sino-Indian relationship in general in the future. Joining me today in the studio are Professor Ramaswamy Sudha Sharma, Professor and Dean of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy at O.P. Jindal Global University, and Prof Mishra, an Associate Professor from the Jindal Global Law School, also at O.P. Jindal Global University. Gentlemen, welcome to the studio. Professor Sudha Sharma, let me ask you for your opinion about the new Indian ambassador. What is your impression of him and his appointment at this particular moment?
He's a highly respected officer of the Indian Foreign Service. He served in China, as you mentioned, in Guangzhou and in Beijing. And it's the kind of, and he has experience in two sensitive countries in the neighborhood, Pakistan and Bhutan.
Okay.
And so obviously he's a first-class professional. But then he's a member of the Foreign Service, and foreign policy in India is made in the cabinet, and he's the ambassador. So one shouldn't place too much emphasis on the individual ambassador in the Foreign Service. Foreign policy is made in the capitals, and the ambassadors, give voice to it.
Yeah.
Equally, China's ambassadors to India have also been highly knowledgeable about India and the long civilizational connections. So in the same way, but they are not making policy in India.
Of course. We have to look at the overall environment of bilateral relations at this moment. Professor Mishra, your take on the current atmosphere of Sino-Indian ties? I mean, okay, I believe we're not in the storm, in the eye of the storm anymore, but where are we exactly?
Well, first of all, I think the new ambassador speaks Mandarin. That is also a very interesting thing, because during my last few days stay in China, I realized that how important it is to understand and speak Mandarin, because translation is one thing, but interpretation is quite another thing. If you speak Mandarin, then it's much better to communicate with your counterparts now in China. As far as China-India relationship at this stage is concerned, I think the mistrust remains quite deep, as it was in the past, but I sense an eagerness on both countries' part that they wish to engage with each other, but I also sense that, at least from India's perspective, we don't know how to engage with China at this point. Perhaps a new ambassador to China would be able to help us in that regard.
What do scholars think about this issue? I think this is agreed that mistrust is there. Mistrust has been there for a long time. The problem is how to break that, how to improve that. Professor Sudha Sharma.
No, certainly there's, foreign policy is not static, and there's a very good, warm rapport from all that we can tell between the President of China and the Prime Minister of India. And so when you have an ease in communication at the very top leadership of the two countries, it seeps down the line to all parts where there may be points of tension. So that's a good augury. Prime Minister Modi has placed a lot of emphasis on a new foreign policy for India. The President of China has talked about a new era with new beginnings. So all this is very promising, and I think that even though there may have been long-standing tensions, the time is now when there's likely to be a significant change. That's how we read it. I mean, not that we are privy to whatever goes on inside governments. As academics, we are at a distance. But nonetheless, the surmise that we can come to in terms of the meetings that have happened at the highest level between the two countries, it's very promising that relations will take a new turn.
It's good to hear that. However, I think the external environment, the policy environment, seems to point to the other direction. We hear the US President coming to Asia talking about a free and open Indo-Pacific, which has aroused quite some attention, let's say, if not concern, among the Chinese policymakers and researchers. And one of the reasons why instead of using Asia-Pacific, they're using Indo-Pacific, people believe is because they want to bring India into the picture. How do you look at that?
Well, I don't think we should place too much emphasis on such semantics. After all, there's a country called Indonesia, which signifies that there is a civilizational influence that India has had throughout that region. But so it doesn't matter whether it's called Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific in terms of terminology. I don't think that makes a big difference, because I think the proximity of India and China as neighbors and the need for these two powers to resolve their long-standing issues of friction is much stronger than what the US president on a visit to Southeast Asia might want to call it, Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific. Doesn't matter, I don't think.
Mishra, what is your take on this? Because there are, of course, people who share your view thinking, China and India must develop a close and friendly relationship, but there are also the more hawkish ones thinking China is rising and India must also rival that kind of presence.
India has had a long history of non-alignment movement. In fact, right after independence, India took a very definite stance that India is going to remain, or was going to remain non-aligned. It's just that pivots at that point of time were Russia and America. But now it seems that China is another pillar in the geopolitics of global affairs. But I believe that that stance of India is not going to change, and it's going to, India, for most practical purposes, will remain quite economic policy oriented. So I don't think India would actually resort to any hawkish stand. But I understand that in domestic politics, it's possible that there could be some hawkish statement issued by various quarters. But fundamentally, I believe that India would stick by its non-alignment policy.
Well, I understand there are many goodwill, and however, the current situation is that there seems to be difficulty to, let's say, at least cultural communication between China and India. For instance, China has some 500 Confucius Institutes around the world, but only 2 in India, and the number of Indian students studying in China also less. But if you look at the number of Chinese students in India compared with the number of Indian students in China, there are still more Chinese students in India than the other way around. Why is that? What is behind that, Mr. Sudha Sharma?
Well, I think that's due to language primarily, because most of the university graduates in India learn in English, and they have this belief that if they come to China, there'll be very few places where all of the instruction is in English. But the fact that, see, we are 2 of us here in Beijing now from the Open Global University. Our university has very multiple collaborations with Chinese universities, exchange of scholars. I'm here teaching at the Central University of Political Science and Law, a very intensive course over 2 weeks. So things are changing in that respect. We are going to have students from Tsinghua come for an immersion program to our university, and there are students from the law faculty already studying in Hangzhou, in Shenzhen, in Tsinghua. So there's a rising trend of interest, and it's motivated by the fact that the 2 countries need to understand each other more directly through their scholars, instead of being mediated by perceptions of scholars located in the United States or the United Kingdom, respectively, about each other's countries. So when more Chinese scholars visit India and have first-hand knowledge about what goes on in India, and likewise Indian scholars come to China and learn at first hand what goes on in China, undoubtedly our relations will improve. The people-to-people contact will make a big difference eventually to foreign policy and to relations. I'm convinced of that.
Having lived the China-India Doklam standoff, do you feel a little bit frustrated that the more serious voices, which takes longer time, you know, because you need to look into the facts and, you know, you are maybe not the most eye-catching, are you a little bit frustrated that sometimes these rational voices are not getting heard?
Well, I mean, you know, there are many ways to read a situation like this. You know, you are a journalist, you know that you can tell the story through different lenses. So I think the perception would be that it could be something very local as to what a military commander on either side may have done or think is the right thing to do. That may not be exactly what the political leadership in the respective countries may want to see and done. Mm-hmm. So I don't think one can, you know, one is not understating the seriousness of what happened in Doklam, but on the other hand, it's not something that's going to, you know, escalate, and there's much more responsible leadership on the two countries. As we know, you know, the standoff in a way has ended. So we have to give it a time, and we have to give more understanding, and so and even perceptions of scholars and the voices of people in Bhutan also matters.
Yeah.
So they're not just pawns in the business. Mm-hmm. It's a sovereign, independent country.
No. Yeah, and it's very difficult to get the majority view. You know, sometimes you hear one person, you hear another person, but what is the big picture? That is the difficult thing. Professor Mishra, what lesson do you think we can take away from the Doklam experience? Very briefly, 1 minute, please.
Well, the media economy in India, not only in India but also in many other countries, people are aware that how important for media, various types of media, it is important for various types of media to come out with sensationalism, sensationalist story, and people seem to be aware of that. I don't think people are taking those kind of news items so seriously, but I would not deny that there is a section in society which does take it seriously, but there is some amount of maturity as well in the Indian population, and I believe it will be same in China as well.
Yeah, we need to always be on the watch for what is right, the right information, or the more rational information with more elements of truth in there. Many thanks. Very big topic, but time is limited. Many thanks to Professor Ramaswamy Sudha Sharma, Professor and Dean of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, and Anand Mishra, an Associate Professor from the Jindal Global Law School, both at OP Jindal Global University. And that is it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. We've got The Point.